And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Friday evening here with me in New York. And once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks, well, it would be the 119th birthday, such as it is, of the former lineal world heavyweight boxing champion James J. Braddock, or Jimmy as he was commonly known. You might know him better by his nickname, the Cinderella Man. Not coincidentally, the title of the 2005 film about Jim Braddock's life, starring Russell Crowe in the title role, was called simply Cinderella Man. So, the early days of boxing, certainly the first half of the 20th century in particular, there were so many great nicknames of legendary fighters, almost as if history was moving its own huge hand to further certain sports. Babe Ruth, the Sultan of SWAT, Ty Cobb, the Georgia Peach, Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee Clipper. These incredible sports nicknames, which in the early days, before TV especially, it just put images and ideas into people's heads, into fans, and it built up fan bases all over various sports. Well, in boxing, you had the Galveston Giant, Jack Johnson, great nickname, right? Jack Dempsey, the Manasseh Mauler. I mean, it would be hard to find a more perfect nickname for a boxer than the Manasseh Mauler. Hell, Rocky Marciano, the Brockton Blockbuster. Gene Tunney, the Fighting Marine. Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber. James J. Braddock, the Cinderella Man. You know, his nickname was not literal, but Jim Braddock was, if we're just going off of boxing skill, he's one of the weaker fighters to hold the world heavyweight title. There were other kind of small-ish fighters of the day who were just more skilled. Braddock was called Cinderella Man because his whole life, cliche though this might be, kind of like Rocky Balboa, his whole life was 1,000,000-to-1 shot. Jim Braddock had no business winning any portion of the world heavyweight title. He was an underdog. He was a light heavyweight. So this is something that is a little bit, I don't want to say underreported. Casual boxing fans will say it this way. There were a lot of great fighters who were fighting above their weight class as heavyweights, that their natural weight, when I say natural weight, meaning their best fighting weight, was light heavy. Or in the case of Evander Holyfield, if you want to talk from a more contemporary perspective, Evander was a cruiser. His natural weight, he could have theoretically fought at heavyweight, but his natural weight, he was a cruiser. In his early portion of his career, he was fighting 190, 195. And if I'm not mistaken, at the Olympics of 1988, I think he competed as a light heavyweight. I could be wrong about that. But when you look at fighters such as Jim Braddock challenged for the light heavyweight title in 1929. He fought a guy who himself was an all-timer, and if we're being honest, a better light heavyweight than Jim Braddock ever was heavyweight, named Tommy Loughran. Tommy Loughran is, again, one of those iconic names in the sport. So Jim Braddock fought at 174 in 1929. And then he had some health issues, some personal issues. The Great Depression fucked shit up for almost everyone. It was a ton of people that got hurt. I mean, members of my own family. I mean, my dad's mom's father. So I guess my great-grandfather, he was a Wall Street guy. He was in what is known as arbitrage. Whoops. Got wiped out. Jim Braddock was working as a laborer after his loss to Tommy Loughran, which was a fight a lot of people thought he could win. He had hand problems. A lot of things went wrong for him, and he was out of the sport for quite some time. But he made a comeback. He fought and defeated a couple of guys. So the way that it goes with boxing is you have fighters who were former either high ranked, they held pieces of titles, and now they're past their prime, and they're kind of, the phrase they used to use was trial horse. That you throw a young rising contender against the kind of past their prime former great as a stepping stone. And Braddock won a couple of fights against fighters that were supposed to beat him. And that is how he got his shot at the title. So before Braddock, you do have the kind of legendary names. And Jack Dempsey, when I talk about undersized, Jack Dempsey would have fought at light heavyweight if it were today. He could have gotten to 175. I think maybe he weighed 180. You want to talk about a one-man wrecking crew? Good luck to any light heavyweight in history beating Jack Dempsey. Anyone. Even Roy Jones Jr. He could outskill him. Better not get hit, though. I mean, Dempsey was fucking brutal. Jess Willard was about 260, and he wasn't the most skilled fighter, but Jess Willard knew how to fight. He knew how to hold his hands up. And he outweighed Dempsey by at least 80 pounds, and Jack fucking pieced him up. He pieced him up. He shattered every bone in Willard's face. And Willard was tough. And yeah, I can keep going. Bro, what the fuck? Dempsey was an undersized heavyweight. Max Baer, the man who James Braddock fought for the title, he was an undersized heavyweight. Gene Tunney, did he even weigh 200 pounds? So there are a number of fighters, of great fighters that you can point to through history. You want to go a little bit further. Ezzard Charles. They were fighting above their best weight because that's where the money was. And they're all born competitors, and let's just go. Let's see what happens. Now, we're not talking about enormous weight disparities like today, where if you have, let's say, a 204-pound Joe Louis in his prime, could he beat Lennox Lewis? I mean, I don't know. He probably could outskill him, but could he beat him? It's impossible to say because Lennox would have so much weight and height and all of that. And that's where you get into how much difference does skill really make? It's all guesswork. But Jim Braddock was the kind of guy that the country, and this is another cliche, the country kind of needed. Because he was a guy who he had been a top flight fighter and not somebody that you would have expected was going to be struggling financially. And then he had to go back to being a regular laborer like everyone else, but he was still young enough. He was 30, however old he was, and he was given another opportunity, and away we go. And so Max Baer was someone who, he ended up an actor. He had a pretty successful acting career. His brother, Buddy Baer, who later also, he fought for the title against Joe Louis. He was an actor. I think he was on, what was the show with Buddy Ebsen? Beverly Hillbillies. I think Buddy Baer was on that show. But Max Baer was somebody he was known as like a clown. He was, I don't want to say he was like Ali with the predictions and stuff, but he was a big talker and he was a character, and you knew that he would do other things rather than just box. He kind of had the matinee idol looks, and he had killed someone in a fight, one of his opponents, and I hate to say that it wasn't really that unusual, but Sugar Ray Robinson killed an opponent once. The sport didn't change until, unfortunately, the Ray Mancini Dooku Kim, a fight which should have been stopped by about round 9 or 10. And Ray to this day, what a great guy. Like, Ray Mancini is just one of those salt of the earth types. He's so terrific on social media. He loves meeting people and fans and signing autographs and stuff like that. But like, I can't even imagine what it would do to somebody. Because yeah, Code of the Gladiators, they're out there trying to, especially back in the day, earn a good living for their family and do whatever they can. Nobody's trying to kill anybody else. So Braddock got the opportunity to fight Max Baer. And if you look at like kind of lineal heavyweight champion, you go back to Jack Johnson, the Galveston Giant, he lost to Jess Willard. That was kind of a disputed. There was so much corruption in the sport. That's the other thing. Sound familiar? Where people are still talking about how much corruption there is. There was never not corruption in boxing. People thought Jack Johnson didn't really give his best effort against Jess Willard. Nobody knows to this day, because when Johnson, the fight was in Havana, Cuba, you imagine that. And Johnson, when he allegedly was knocked out, was shielding his eyes from the sun. I got to be honest with you. That looks a little suspicious if you're supposedly knocked unconscious and you're going like this so that the sun doesn't shine in your eyes. In the immortal words of Cardi B, that's suspicious. That's weird. But Jess Willard then got smashed, as I said, almost literally, by Jack Dempsey. Dempsey lost to Gene Tunney. And then there were a lot of great all-timers like Jack Sharkey and Max Schmeling, the extraordinary German fighter Max Schmeling, who also was undersized for a heavyweight, but Schmeling was an amazing talent, and he was one of the kind of early technical scientific fighters. You know, the first time he fought Joe Louis, he actually broke down fight film, right? It's something that is done now. You could do it on your phone. But back then, he was breaking down film with his trainers and his, kind of team. And he figured out there were a couple of things that Joe Louis was doing where only a fighter as skillful as Schmeling could take advantage of anyway. And he did take advantage. I mean, he just really kicked the shit out of Joe Louis when Louis should have been in his prime on his way up. But that's the era of Jim Braddock. There were great fighters before, and then there were greater fighters after, but he just happened to make his comeback at the right time. And Max Baer was a showboat. He was a guy with a huge punch, but he kind of fought in spurts. And there was the opportunity, especially if somebody was popular and the sort of fighter that the fans and the sport of boxing would have wanted to give a good account of himself, made him look good, it made the sport look good, that he was even getting a title shot. Well, let's just see what happens. Now, many of you have seen the movie Cinderella Man. There was some controversy, and I love Ron Howard, and Russell Crowe just recently, when he was on with Joe Rogan, and they were talking about his career, but Rogan being a fight guy and the MMA and stuff, he wanted to talk about what was it like making Cinderella Man, how much boxing training did you do? I really wouldn't have expected Russell to be that great of an interview because he has the reputation for, being very kind of hardcore, and that he's difficult and all of that. But he sat there for hours, and if you didn't know, you'd say, oh, what a great interview. But he talked about it. He talked about the process of trying to get in shape, and as much as possible, he studied the way that the real Braddock moved in the ring and his footwork, which was maybe a little bit unconventional for the time. And it was really pretty interesting stuff. But the movie, they paint the character of Max Baer in a more negative light than history tells us. And this is problematic. It doesn't ruin the movie, but it's something that you should at least be aware of. Max Baer was a hero for the Jewish community. He ended up being world heavyweight champion, and he wore a Star of David on his trunks. And when he was once asked why, was it just because he wasn't necessarily that religious, but he was proud of his heritage. And he said, well, when I knock my opponent down, I want them to know who did it. Like that kind of thing, where he was wearing it with pride. He was not mocking the opponent because of it, but he was just saying, anybody who has a problem with me because of the religion I happen to be born into, well, how you doing now? He also did not brag, by all accounts, about the fact that one of his opponents had died. It was not something that he was proud of, in a way that Sugar Ray Robinson had nightmares about the fact that he was in there with a guy who really had no business being in there with Sugar Ray Robinson, and a guy ended up dying. So in the world of the movie, and terrific actor Craig Bierko, he is great as Max Baer. Let my kind of historical issues with the film does not take away from the performances. Craig Bierko is fantastic because he has the look. Craig Bierko, a very attractive man, has that matinee idol look to him, and he is very believable as Max Baer because he has the smirk, the kind of laughing snarl. I mean, Max Baer was such a clown. He took the title from Primo Carnera. And Primo Carnera he was kind of a phony champion. It was a corrupt sport. Like I said, you want to see the Primo Carnera story? Humphrey Bogart's final film, The Harder They Fall, starring another future heavyweight champion who was undersized, Jersey Joe Walcott. Primo Carnera was kind of created and made heavyweight champion because it was worth a lot of money to people who were backing him. There was a ton of betting. It was all bad. He should not have been champion. Most people agree with that. And Max Baer, he like knocked him down 8 times. And one of the times Max Baer knocked down Primo Carnera, he went down. And not in the manner of, Rocky II, where both fighters get clipped and they both go down at the end of the fight and they're so exhausted they can't move. Max Baer went down. And when he was asked afterwards, what the hell were you doing? He says, I don't know. It looked like fun. What? But in the world of the movie Cinderella Man, Max Baer is presented as a very antagonistic, really an asshole, if we're being completely fair. And I don't think the movie needed that. I feel like the film could have been a little bit more middle of the road with the character of Max Baer. You didn't need to make him a villain. It's okay to just go out and fight and let's see who wins, rather than making the character this kind of almost sneering, mustache twirling type of a guy. Now, the other thing that the movie does that I think is okay, if you ask me questions off the top of my head, based on my knowledge of history and the kind of early fight films, what is the most boring heavyweight, like world heavyweight title fight? Max Baer versus Jim Braddock is in the conversation. It was a 15-round clutch and grab and clown snooze fest. The movie kind of gives you an idea that that's what the fight was. So it's to Ron Howard's credit that he at least made some attempt to not, do a Rocky movie where it's basically Hagler Hearns and every punch is a home run bomb and one single shot would end the fight if it's real. There is a lot of clutching and grabbing in the climactic fight between Craig Bierko's Max Baer and Russell Crowe's Jim Braddock, but they still make the fight seem a lot more exciting than it actually was. That's okay. It's Hollywood. And Paul Giamatti in the movie as Braddock's manager is amazing. I was under the impression that he was nominated for Oscar for supporting actor, but he wasn't. Like, I convinced myself, I guess, because Giamatti, you could argue he certainly should have been nominated for American Splendor as lead actor in 2003. And a lot of people were clamoring for him to be nominated for lead actor in Sideways in 2004. Oh yeah, he was nominated for supporting for no. Somehow it didn't happen. So you look at Jim Braddock's lifetime record. It's not that impressive. His professional record, he has like twice as many wins as losses. Now, by normal person or normal boxing standards, there's nothing wrong with that. But you look at the all-time great heavyweights, you don't see that many losses on their record in most cases. Like Joe Frazier was 30-0 and he ended up 32-4. That's the kind of thing that you normally see, where somebody is just winning, and then you get the title, and then obviously for the rest of your career, you're not going to be fighting that many stepping stone type fights where you just know you're going to walk through somebody. But Braddock's career record was something like, 54-25 or 26 with a bunch of draws and no contests. A lot of fights ended in no contests. There's a lot of different reasons for that. That really doesn't happen. That really doesn't happen anymore. But another interesting thing, that they didn't get into this in the movie because they were just telling the story of Braddock, the young light heavyweight who was, presumed greatness, got a title shot in New York City. It wasn't Madison Square Garden. It was some other arena that was close, because there was an arena called Madison Square Garden Bowl, but that's also not MSG. I think he fought Loughran in Long Island City in 29, just before the Great Depression, or just before the stock market crash, I should say. But, the movie is that he's a rising contender. He loses a tough fight and everything goes to shit. And then the comeback, and then eventually the victory over Max Baer. He won the title in 1935. Now, this is something I had to look up because the math, as they say, the math wasn't mathing. He beat Max Baer. And the one thing the movie gets right is, for all the antagonism, when I say gets right, specific to the Max Baer character only. The only issue I have with this film is the kind of playing fast and loose with what the real Max Baer and what his process was. But when the fight's over, Baer reacts in the movie the way that he did in real life. Like they didn't do anything to kind of make it seem more like, was he angry? No, he was congratulatory, great fight mate, that kind of thing. But Braddock won the title in 35. Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, who many consider to be, everybody says he's got to be top 3 greatest heavyweights of all time, just as far as, again, Could he beat Lennox Lewis? Probably not. Could he beat Vladimir Klitschko? Probably not. He was not big enough. But he had 25 successful title defenses. That's fucking sick. And yes, he had the Bum of the Month club. There weren't that many really great heavyweights in the 40s. There really were none. That's where you got the Bum of the Month club. He fought a lot of guys who were little more than club fighters. Two-ton Tony Galento, John Henry Johnson, guys like that. This is all matter of historical record. But Joe Louis is the guy who took the title from Braddock. So I'm like, okay, so he won, Braddock beat Bear in 1935, and then he lost the title a little more than 2 years later. It's a fair question to ask, and I'm scratching my head because I don't remember reading about any successful title defenses. Why, I got a gap in my memory here. I wonder who Braddock defended the title successfully against. He didn't. Could you imagine today a world heavyweight champion going 2 years without making a single defense? That ain't happening. That's what we call 0% chance. Now, history tells us Lewis was the rising contender. He had lost the fight to Schmeling. They wanted Lewis to fight Max Schmeling. Braddock was supposed to fight Max Schmeling. But then there were all kinds of issues because Schmeling was German and Hitler, and we don't want to take the chance because Max is going to beat him. So Braddock did not fight, and I have no idea how the governing bodies of boxing, they were so quick to take Ali's title away just at the hint that he wasn't going to play ball with the U.S. government when it came time to propagandize the Vietnam War. They're ready to pull the title away, and they did. How did he keep the title for 2 years while making no defenses? How was everyone in the sport on board with this? I have absolutely no idea. But the idea, we're going to wait for Lewis. Braddock knew he couldn't beat Joe Louis. I mean, come on. But we'll wait for Lewis and let's make a fight. And it was more lucrative for Braddock to fight Lewis than Schmeling. Nobody really wanted that fight because everyone knew Max was going to win. He was too good. As Joe Louis was way too good, even a kind of an older era Max Schmeling, not a good matchup for Jim Braddock at all. Man, Schmeling was so crafty. The way, his movement was ahead of its time. And for a guy who didn't really look that big, he could really drop that right hand on you. So 2 years, and then Jim Braddock fought Joe Louis, and Louis really, it was not competitive. I think Braddock may have dropped Joe early, but it was kind of a weird, sort of a slip almost. And the thing with Joe Louis, he did take a lot of knockdowns, relatively speaking, but he had incredible recuperative abilities. And he was a guy who could get sized up and go down hard, and he's popping up at the count of 3. There are just some fighters that seem to take more knockdowns than others. And then there are other guys that it was almost impossible to move them off their feet, almost impossible to make them take a backward step. But Jim Braddock retired not long after the Lewis fight. His hands were completely fucked up. He had other physical issues, and he'd made enough money. He didn't need to continue. Still a very young man. I think he was around 33 or 34 when he called it a career. And if you say that he's one of the weaker heavyweight champs, well, yeah. He was a light heavyweight. His best weight class probably was light heavyweight. He was an overachiever, as were so many of the great fighters who fought above their best weight. I mean, if you look at Ezzard Charles 180 to 185. How did he win the world heavyweight title? How is it even possible that he almost beat Rocky Marciano twice? Some guys are just extraordinary fighters, and a 30-pound difference, let's say 185 to 215, or a 20-pound difference, 185 to 205, I guess you could deal with it. 185 to 240 or 250. No, thank you. But hey, Roy Jones Jr., what was he about? Was he even 190 when he beat John Ruiz? And that fight wasn't even competitive. But Jim Braddock, the Cinderella Man, what an incredible nickname. And a Cinderella story, a classic underdog who rose and captured the World Heavyweight Championship. Happy birthday, happy 119th birthday in memory of James J. Braddock. This has been episode 375 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I love these boxing episodes. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.